Dawn rose reluctant over the prairie, the light spilling in thin silver ribbons through a sky heavy with a memory of frost. The land held its breath, as if waiting to see which lives would continue and which would be claimed by the vast indifference of the plains. A broken wagon sat like a carcass in the mud, its wheels splintered, the canvas sagging under a glaze of ice. Beside it, Clara May Hensley sat slumped, her skirts stiff with cold, her hair matted from wind and sleepless nights. Her 6-year-old daughter, Annie, curled against her side, clutching a one-armed rag doll as though it were a talisman that might keep the darkness away. Clara's lips were cracked, her eyes sunken. Her husband had left 2 days earlier, promising to bring help from the next town, but his back had disappeared over the horizon and never returned. In her bones, she knew he was gone for good. The cold was in her marrow, but the heavier weight was shame, being left behind, becoming the kind of story folks tell with a shrug and a shake of the head. She kept her palm pressed to Annie's small back, feeling the shallow rise and full of her breathing, willing herself to stand long enough to see her child safe. The sound of hoofbeats came soft at first, a tremor in the earth, then steadier, closer. Through the thin veil of morning mist, a lone rider appeared, tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a sun-bleached coat, hat brim shadowing his eyes. His horse, a bay with a long scar down its flank, moved at an unhurried pace, as if the rider had measured each step against the weight of the day. He drew up before them, dismounted, and stood for a moment as if to let the silence between strangers decide their next move. He said finally, his voice low and even. He reached into his stool bag and drew out a tin canteen, offering it first to Annie. Clara watched the child's hands tremble as she took it, water dripping down her chin. He glanced at the wagon, at the empty trail stretching behind and ahead. "Can you walk? We'll ride slow." The question carried no pity, just fact. Pride made Clara hesitate, but she nodded. He lifted Annie into the saddle, tucking the doll beside her. The reins in one hand, he walked alongside the horse, letting Clara keep her own pace. The thawing snow crunched underfoot, leather creaked with each movement, and the wind carried the faint scent of coffee grounds from his pack. They spoke little. At midday, he crouched by the roadside, taking the rag doll from Annie. With a strip torn from his old bandana, he fashioned a makeshift arm and tied it in place. "My little girl had one like that," he murmured, then rose without another word. Clara wondered about the girl, and about the man who carried such silence without bitterness. They passed a rider heading the other way, his eyes lingering on Clara before curling his mouth into a smirk. He tipped his hat to the man, Elias Boone, she'd learned, and rode on without a greeting for her. The look was enough to tell her that whatever awaited in the next town, it would not be free of judgment. By the time they reached Dry Creek, the sun had sunk low, turning the false front buildings copper in the light. Elias tied the horse outside the general store and helped Annie down. Inside, the scent of flour dust and lamp oil wrapped around them. Behind the counter, Mrs. Ruth Calhoun glanced up, her gaze settling on Clara with the precision of someone who could measure a person in 3 seconds flat. "Found yourself some company, Elias?" she asked, her tone edged with suggestion. "Just needing supplies," Elias said, ignoring her bait. He ordered flour, salt pork, coffee, and, after a pause, a jar of peppermint sticks. When the parcels were bundled, he slid a single peppermint into Annie's palm. The girl's face lit as though she held something precious enough to be kept forever. Clara felt the burn of eyes on her as they stepped back into the street. The ride to Elias's ranch took them out of sight of the town's curious windows. His place was modest, the kind of spread that spoke of hands that did the work themselves. He stabled the bay and told Clara to take Annie inside. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old bread. That night, Elias slept in the barn, leaving them the warmth of the hearth. Through the window, Clara saw him brushing down the horse by lantern light, each stroke deliberate, like a prayer said with his hands. Something inside her shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening of the knot that had kept her shoulders tight for days. The next morning, the sound of hooves returned, but heavier, quicker. Clara stepped to the doorway to see 3 men outside the fence line. One leaned forward in his saddle. "Word is you've taken in a stray," he called to Elias. "Folks are wondering if you plan to keep her." Shame and fury warred in Clara's chest. She opened her mouth, but Elias stepped forward, his voice calm and sharp enough to cut through the cold. "She's here because no one else rode that trail when it mattered. If her being alive bothers you, take it up with me." The men exchanged glances, their bravado faltering. One spat into the dirt, then turned his horse. Without another word, they rode off toward the horizon. Elias watched until they were small in the distance, his stance easy but unyielding. Clara's breath came unsteady, not from fear, but from the sudden, unfamiliar certainty that someone had stood for her without asking for anything in return. Annie ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, peppermint sticks still clutched in her hand. The frost was beginning to melt, drops of water slipping from the fence rails into the dark soil below. Clara felt her feet anchored for the first time in weeks. She did not know what the next day would bring, but she knew she could face it from here. And remember this, because the prairie will not. The wind doesn't stop to ask if you deserve its kindness, and the land doesn't weigh your name against your mistakes. But once in a lifetime, someone may come riding in slow, carrying nothing more than water, a strip of cloth for a child's doll, and the steady proof that your worth isn't measured by those who left, but by those who stayed. Hold on to them, for they are rarer than rain in summer, and just as life-giving.